Sparky's clumsy hands, and Mr. Grumble's gripes. The wrench slipped, the metallic clang echoing through the cavernous garage. Sparky winced, watching the tool bounce off the fender of Mrs. Higgins' prized powder blue convertible, leaving a fresh scratch in its wake. He scrambled to his feet, his cheeks flushed a shade redder than the vintage tail lights. "Blast and bother," he muttered, examining the damage. It wasn't huge, more of a blemish than a gaping wound, but on Mrs. Higgins' car, it was practically a declaration of war. He knew how much she adored that thing. From the depths of his dimly lit office, Mr. Grumbles emerged, his face a thundercloud gathering on the horizon. The scent of stale coffee and simmering rage preceded him. "What was that infernal racket, Sprocket?" he barked, his voice raspy as a rusty exhaust pipe. Sparky held up the offending wrench. "Sorry, Mr. Grumbles. Just a little slip-up. I'll buff it right out." Grumbles' eyes narrowed, focusing on the scratch with laser-like intensity. "A little slip-up? That's going to cost me, Sprocket. Do you have any idea how much Mrs. Higgins charges for her prize-winning apple pies? I'll be paying for this with my lunch for a month." Sparky swallowed, the lump in his throat feeling bigger than a carburetor. "I said I'd fix it, sir. I have some touch-up paint." "Touch-up paint? On a classic convertible? You'll make it worse, you blithering buffoon." Grumble's voice rose another octave, bouncing off the oil-stained walls. "Sometimes I wonder if you're deliberately trying to ruin me, Sprocket. Are you? Are you secretly in league with Big Auto, trying to drive Grumble's garage out of business?" Sparky fidgeted, wiping his greasy hands on his already greasy overalls. "No, sir. I never do anything like that. I like working here." It was a half-truth. He liked the idea of working there, the camaraderie he imagined, the satisfaction of fixing things. The reality, however, was a constant tightrope walk between eagerness and error, kindness and catastrophe. "Like working here? You cost me more money than you make, Sprocket. I swear, if I didn't feel sorry for your lack of coordination, I'd have fired you months ago." He jabbed a finger in Sparky's direction, the motion as jerky and unpredictable as a sputtering engine. "One more incident, Sprocket. One more scratch, dent, or drop of oil where it shouldn't be, and you're out. Understand?" Sparky nodded miserably, his gaze fixed on the concrete floor. The familiar weight of his clumsiness settled on his shoulders, heavier than a truck axle. Just then, a familiar Robin's egg-blue sedan pulled into the garage. Mayor McMillan, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, emerged with a bright smile that momentarily pierced the gloom. "Mortimer, dear," she chirped, her voice carrying through the garage like birdsong. "Just a quick checkup for Betsy here. She's been making a funny little noise." Grumbles plastered a fake smile on his face, the transformation almost comical. "Mildred, always a pleasure. What seems to be the trouble?" He shot a glare at Sparky that could curdle milk. "Sprocket, go sweep the back. And try not to trip over anything expensive." Sparky shuffled towards the back of the garage, grabbing a broom as tall as himself. As he swept, he could still hear Mayor McMillan's voice, though muffled by the sounds of the garage. "Oh, it's just a little rattle, Mortimer. Nothing serious, I'm sure. But you know how I am about Betsy. She's practically a member of the family." Grumbles chuckled, a sound as pleasant as nails on a chalkboard. "Of course, Mildred. We'll take good care of her. You know, Sprocket here is quite the diligent worker. He'll see to it personally." Sparky nearly choked on the dust he was sweeping. Diligent? He risked a peek around the corner, catching Mayor McMillan's warm, knowing gaze. She offered him a small, sympathetic smile. "Well, that's good to hear," Mayor McMillan said, her voice laced with a subtle hint of skepticism. "He seems like a nice young man. A little enthusiastic, perhaps." Grumbles sputtered. "Enthusiastic. Yes, that's exactly it. Overflowing with enthusiasm." He turned back to Sparky, his smile vanishing like a mirage. "Get back to sweeping, Sprocket, and try not to set the broom on fire." Sparky retreated further into the shadows, the rhythmic swish of the broom a soundtrack to his humiliation. He knew Mr. Grumbles didn't believe a word he said to Mayor McMillan, and neither did she. He was just a clumsy kid, barely tolerated, one mistake away from being out on the street. He swept harder, the dust swirling around him like a miniature tornado. Maybe, just maybe, if he worked hard enough, if he was careful enough, he could prove them wrong. Maybe he could actually be good at this. But as he turned to empty the dustpan, his foot caught on a stray oil can, sending it clattering to the floor. The metallic crash echoed through the garage, silencing even Mr. Grumbles. Sparky closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable storm. The storm unleashes. The sky, moments ago a cheerful blue, turned a bruised purple. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through Sparky's boots, shaking the wrench he held. He glanced up, shielding his eyes with a greasy hand. The wind, picking up ferocity, whipped at the tattered edges of the garage awning. "Looks like we're in for it," Mr. Grumbles grumbled. Emerging from the office, a ledger clutched in his bony hand. He surveyed the darkening sky with the apprehension of a man watching his already meager savings evaporate. "Sparky, get the sandbags from the back. And try not to trip over your own feet this time." Sparky scrambled to obey, the earlier sting of Mr. Grumble's words already fading, replaced by a familiar sense of purpose. Bad weather meant more work, and more work meant a slightly less likely chance of getting fired. He wrestled with the heavy burlap sacks, their rough texture chafing against his skin. The first fat raindrops began to splatter on the cracked concrete floor, growing in intensity with alarming speed. By the time Sparky had hauled the last sandbag to the front of the garage, the rain was a torrential downpour, blurring the world outside into a gray, watery haze. Lightning flashed, illuminating Mr. Grumble's pinched face as he frantically tried to lower the garage door. The mechanism groaned in protest, sticking halfway. "Sparky, help me with this infernal thing," Mr. Grumble shrieked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. Together, they strained against the stubborn metal, finally managing to wrestle it shut with a resounding clang. But the respite was short-lived. Water was already pooling at the base of the door, seeping into the garage in rivulets. "The river," Sparky exclaimed, remembering the small creek that ran alongside the town's main street. Usually a gentle trickle. Mr. Grumbles rushed to the front window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. His face paled. "It's overflowing. The whole street's flooding." Panic flared in Sparky's chest. He thought of Mrs. Higgins, her little house nestled close to the riverbank. He pictured her prize-winning roses, now likely submerged under murky water. "We have to do something," Sparky said, his voice tight with worry. "Do something? What do you suggest, Sparky?" "We bail out the entire town with a teaspoon," Mr. Grumbles retorted, throwing his hands up in despair. He scurried to the back of the garage, muttering about inventory and insurance claims. The water level outside was rising rapidly. It lapped against the bottom of the window, turning the street into a churning brown river. Cars abandoned by their owners bobbed precariously in the current. The force of the water against the garage door was becoming palpable, a constant, insistent pressure. Sparky grabbed a broom and began frantically sweeping the water away from the door, a futile effort against the relentless surge. He knew it wouldn't hold for long. The garage was old, its foundations weak. He glanced at Mr. Grumbles, who was now huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands. "Mr. Grumbles, we need to move the cars. They'll be ruined if the water gets any higher." Mr. Grumbles looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "Move them where? The whole town is flooding. We can try to get them up on the ramps. It's better than nothing." Sparky insisted, his voice filled with urgency. After a long, agonizing moment, Mr. Grumbles nodded weakly. All right. But if anything happens to them, you're paying for it, Sparky. Every last bolt and spark plug." Together, they waded through the ankle-deep water, pushing and shoving the vehicles onto the ramps. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a banshee. Rain lashed against the metal roof, creating a deafening cacophony. Lightning illuminated the scene in flashes, revealing their desperate struggle against the rising tide. As they secured the last car, a sickening crack echoed through the garage. The front door buckled inward, groaning under the immense pressure. A torrent of water surged into the garage, sweeping tools and debris across the floor. "It's going to collapse," Sparky yelled, grabbing Mr. Grumble's arm. "We have to get out of here." Mr. Grumbles, his face ashen, could only nod, his mouth moving silently. The storm had unleashed its full fury, and they were at its mercy. A cry in the flood. The wind howled, snatching at Sparky's breath as he wrestled with the garage door. Rain lashed down, each drop feeling like a tiny ice pellet. The rising water had already swallowed the bottom step, turning Main Street into a churning river. Inside, Mr. Grumbles was a whirlwind of frantic energy, shoving tools onto higher shelves and muttering about ruined carburetors. "Sparky, hurry up. That Jag's worth more than your life," Mr. Grumbles yelled over the storm's roar, pointing a trembling finger at the sleek, silver car parked precariously close to the encroaching water. Sparky strained against the heavy door, finally managing to secure it with a rusty bolt. He turned to face his boss, water streaming down his face. "Almost got it, Mr. Grumbles. Just need to double-check the—" His words died in his throat. Through the sheeting rain, he saw her. Dr. Sterling. She was further down the street, near the bakery, her slight frame struggling against the current. The water swirled around her waist, pulling her off balance with each surge. Her arms flailed, and a strangled cry was momentarily carried on the wind before being swallowed by the storm. Sparky's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew Dr. Sterling. Everyone in town knew Dr. Sterling, the kind, eccentric doctor who treated everyone, rich or poor, and always had a comforting word. He'd once helped her jumpstart her ancient, sputtering Volvo in the dead of winter. "Mr. Grumbles," he shouted, pointing towards the struggling figure. "Dr. Sterling. She needs help." Mr. Grumbles, perched atop a stack of tires, peered in the direction Sparky indicated. His face, already pale with anxiety, paled further. "Forget her. We have to save a Jag. That's Mrs. Abernathy's pride and joy. She'll sue us into oblivion if anything happens to it." "But Mr. Grumbles, she's drowning," Sparky protested, his voice rising with desperation. He took a step towards the door. The image of Dr. Sterling's terrified face burned into his mind. Mr. Grumbles scrambled down from the tires, his eyes wide with panic. He grabbed Sparky's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Are you crazy? You can't go out there. It's suicide. That water's moving fast. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "who's going to protect the cars? You think I can do this by myself? We'll lose everything." Sparky hesitated, his gaze darting between Mr. Grumble's desperate face and the disappearing figure of Dr. Sterling in the flood. The rain continued to fall, blurring the scene into a chaotic watercolor. The garage, his job, Mr. Grumble's livelihood, all of it seemed insignificant compared to the life hanging in the balance just a few yards away. "But," Sparky stammered, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Mr. Grumble's grip tightened on his arm. "No buts. I'm ordering you, Sparky. Stay here. Protect the cars. That's your job." Mr. Grumble's voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. He pulled Sparky back towards the Jaguar, his eyes fixated on the rising water line creeping up the tires. Sparky felt a knot of frustration tighten in his stomach. He was torn, paralyzed by conflicting loyalties and fears. He glanced again towards the street. Dr. Sterling was further away now, almost completely submerged, only her hands visible, reaching desperately towards the sky. The cry, weak but piercing, reached him again, cutting through the storm's fury. It was a sound of pure desperation, a sound that snapped something within him. He knew what he had to do. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Sparky yanked his arm free from Mr. Grumble's grasp. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grumbles," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I have to help her." He turned and plunged into the raging flood. The heroic dive. Sparky didn't pause. Mr. Grumble's apoplectic rant became a distant growl as Sparky wrenched open the garage door and plunged headlong into the surging deluge. The frigid water clawed at him, a stunning assault that stole the air from his lungs. Submerged lights, cast wavering, grotesque patterns on the churning surface. The current, a relentless force, threatened to sweep him away. He battled against it, his muscles burning as he struggled to keep his bearings, each pull of his arms a defiant refusal to yield. Squinting, he strained to see through the murky depths, desperate for any sign of Dr. Sterling. An odd assortment of detritus spun around him. Shattered planks, discarded tires, even a lurid pink flamingo, a bizarre reminder of the life now submerged. Then he saw her, a beacon of cobalt blue against the muddy torrent. Dr. Sterling clung desperately to a half-drowned fence post, her face a mask of distress. The flood battered her position, threatening to wrest her from her fragile hold. "Dr. Sterling," he bellowed, his voice swallowed by the raging waters. Ignoring the ache in his chest, he kicked harder, driven by raw instinct. Each meter was an eternity. The current wrestled him sideways, forcing him to compensate, his muscles screaming their discontent. The gritty, brackish water tasted foul as he prayed he wouldn't choke. Finally, he reached her. She looked up, her eyes reflecting a blend of fear and burgeoning hope. "Sparky, I'm so grateful." Her voice, thready and faint, barely carried. "Hang on, Doc. I've got you." He grasped for her hand, his own fingers stiff with cold. Her grip surprised him with its strength, but he felt the tremors that racked her body. Wresting her from the post proved another brutal trial. The current slammed them against the splintered wood, each surge a punishing blow. Sparky locked an arm around her waist, anchoring them both. "We need to reach the bank," he gasped. "Can you swim?" She shook her head, rivulets cascading down her face. I can barely hold on." Hesitation wasn't an option. He adjusted his grip, pulling her from the tenuous safety of the post and into the full fury of the flood. "Hold tight," he yelled and started to swim. It was a grueling ordeal. Dr. Sterling, though petite, was a dead weight in the water. The current seemed determined to claim them both. Sparky fixed his gaze on the distant shore, a blurred tree-line in the gloom, and fought on. He churned and pulled, his body a machine fueled by adrenaline and sheer willpower. His strength began to wane. His arms felt like concrete, his legs cramped, and his lungs burned with every ragged breath. He risked a glance at Dr. Sterling. Her eyes were shut tight, her face deathly pale. He couldn't let her perish. He couldn't allow them both to drown. Summoning a hidden reserve of energy, he pushed forward, stroke after excruciating stroke. The bank seemed closer, yet his vision swam, making him question reality. Then his hand struck something solid. He stumbled forward, his knees digging into the yielding mud. He scrambled onto the bank, dragging Dr. Sterling with him. They collapsed onto the sodden ground, gasping for air, drenched and spent. Sparky lay on his back, oblivious to the cold mud leaching into his clothes. He was alive. Dr. Sterling was alive. He turned and saw her beside him, her eyes slowly opening. She looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. You rescued me, Sparky," she whispered. "You're a true hero." He coughed, expelling a mouthful of gritty water. "I just did what anyone would have done." But even as he spoke, he knew the words rang false. Mr. Grumbles would have watched them sink. A jolt of pain ripped through his side. He groaned, clutching his ribs. He hadn't registered it in the chaos, but he must have collided with something in the water. Dr. Sterling struggled to sit, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right, Sparky? You're hurt." "Just a bit bruised," he said, trying to minimize the injury. A shout cut through the air. "Sprocket! Sterling!" Mr. Grumbles stood at the water's edge, his face contorted with rage. "Get back here this instant, Sprocket. You're dismissed. Fired." Sparky stumbled onto the asphalt, clutching his bruised arm. Mr. Grumbles materialized before him, a scowl etched deep into his face, the embodiment of simmering fury. Rain slicked the sparse strands of his hair to his scalp, amplifying his cadaverous appearance. "You utter fool!" he shrieked, flecks of saliva spraying outwards. "Do you grasp the magnitude of your idiocy?" Sparky, still winded, mumbled, "But Dr. Sterling. Dr. Sterling can manage." "Probably. Mr. Grumbles dismissed him with a flick of his wrist, his gaze fixed on the muddy ruin of Mrs. Higgins' Cadillac, its tail fins submerged in the encroaching deluge. That, you simpleton, was a '59 Eldorado. Pristine, or, rather, was pristine until you decided to repurpose it as a makeshift dam. Sparky's stomach churned. He hadn't spared a thought for the car, his sole focus locked on reaching the doctor. A sharp pang of remorse pierced through him, eclipsing the throbbing in his limb. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Grumbles. I didn't intend to. Sorry won't drain a waterlogged engine and straighten a mangled bumper. Apologies won't cover the restoration costs. Regret won't keep my shop from going under. Mr. Grumbles' voice cracked, reaching a fever pitch that drew the attention of the few bystanders who hadn't sought shelter. He poked Sparky's chest with a bony digit, sending a shockwave through his ribs. Do you even comprehend the value of that vehicle? More than you'll earn in a decade. Perhaps two. Sparky recoiled, the verbal lashing stinging far more than the physical jab. He knew his employer prized possessions above all else, but hearing the cold calculation, the prioritization of metal over flesh and blood, it felt like a sucker punch. But I rescued her, Mr. Grumbles. Dr. Sterling is alive because of me. He pleaded, desperation coloring his tone. Mr. Grumbles scoffed, a sound like nails scraping on glass. Rescued her? She likely just stumbled on the curb. And even if she was drowning, she has insurance. That car? Irreplaceable. You abandoned the shop. During a flash flood, you jeopardized my livelihood. He wrung his hands, a caricature of despair. I figured. Sparky began, struggling to articulate his reasoning, the urgency that had gripped him, the stark fear of watching Dr. Sterling succumb to the torrent. But Mr. Grumbles cut him off with a snarl. Figured? You never figure, Sparky. That's your curse. Action before thought, and your impulsive heroics have just bankrupted me. He paused, his gaze sharpening to a razor's edge. I'm left with no alternative. The words hung in the air, weighty and irrevocable. A chill of dread snaked its way up Sparky's spine. He knew what was coming, the inevitable consequence of his good deed. You're terminated, Sparky. Mr. Grumbles spat the words out like venom. Leave. Get out of my sight, and never darken my doorstep again. The downpour intensified, mirroring the tempest brewing within Sparky. The wind howled around him, biting at his exposed skin. He stood there, drenched, injured, and now unemployed, the weight of Mr. Grumbles' pronouncement crushing him. But, Mr. Grumbles, where will I go? What am I supposed to do? He begged, the plea laced with an uncharacteristic vulnerability. Mr. Grumbles merely gestured towards the street with a dismissive hand, his face an impassive mask. Not my concern. Should have considered that before you decided to play savior. Sparky stared, a spark of defiance briefly igniting, then quickly extinguished by a wave of profound despair. Arguing was futile. Grumbles' mind was made up. He turned and trudged away, shoulders slumped, head bowed against the deluge. Each step felt heavier than the last. The familiar aroma of grease and steel, the comforting cacophony of the garage, receded behind him. He didn't dare look back. The street was deserted, shops bolted shut, houses cloaked in darkness. The sole sounds were the relentless drumming of the rain and the churning roar of the floodwaters. Sparky wandered aimlessly, his mind a blank canvas, his future a terrifying uncertainty. He possessed no savings, no nearby kin, no contingency plan. All he held was the throbbing ache in his arm, the acrid taste of rejection, and the looming dread of the unknown. He was alone, adrift in a world that seemed to prize profit over kindness, possessions over human lives. The flickering neon sign of a pawn shop beckoned in the distance, a beacon of last resort. He continued walking, drawn towards its faint glow. A rainy walk home. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it seemed to be mocking him, each drop a tiny, icy finger pointing and laughing. Sparky trudged through the receding floodwaters, his boots squelching with every step. The sky was a bruised purple, mirroring the ache in his chest. The once familiar streets of his neighborhood now seemed alien, distorted by the unnatural waterline etched on every building. He passed Mrs. Higgins' bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar, usually a beacon of warmth, now shuttered and dark. The water had reached halfway up the door, a stark reminder of the day's devastation. He wondered if she'd lost much. He knew she relied on her daily bread sales. He stuffed his hands deeper into his pockets. The meager contents, a few loose bolts, and a crumpled $5 bill, offering little comfort. $5 wouldn't even buy him a decent sandwich, let alone what? He didn't even know what he needed to buy. A future, maybe? He kicked a stray piece of driftwood, sending it skittering across the flooded pavement. He replayed the scene with Mr. Grumbles in his head, the man's face contorted with rage, the spittle flying as he screamed about the Cadillac. He'd called it an irreplaceable masterpiece. He hadn't even asked if Dr. Sterling was all right. Sparky had never been good with confrontation. His natural inclination was to shrink, to apologize, even when he'd done nothing wrong. But something had snapped today. He'd stood his ground, told Grumbles exactly what he thought of his priorities. A wave of pride washed over him, quickly followed by the icy grip of reality. Pride didn't pay the bills. He imagined telling his parents. His mother, bless her heart, would fuss and cluck, offering him a plate of her famous meatloaf and endless cups of tea. His father, a retired carpenter with hands as rough as bark, would offer a silent, supportive pat on the back and a knowing look. They'd both be worried sick, of course. He'd have to put on a brave face, tell them he had a few leads, that he wasn't worried. He was a good liar when he needed to be, especially when it came to protecting the people he loved. He reached the bridge that led to his side of town. The river, usually a gentle, meandering stream, was still swollen and angry, churning with debris. The sight of it made him shiver, not just from the cold. He remembered the frantic struggle to get Dr. Sterling to safety, the fear in her eyes, the desperate grip of her hand on his. He'd done the right thing. He knew he had. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd hesitated, worried about the Cadillac, about Mr. Grumble's wrath? Dr. Sterling might not be alive. The thought sent a jolt of nausea through him. He leaned against the railing, the cold metal biting into his skin. He watched the river rage, a dark, swirling mass of uncertainty. Was it worth it? Losing his job? Facing the disappointment of his parents? The uncertainty of the future? He closed his eyes, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He pictured Dr. Sterling's face, her grateful smile, the relief in her voice when she'd thanked him. That image, that feeling was enough. It had to be. He pushed himself off the railing and continued his walk, the rain still falling, but now, somehow, it felt a little less hostile, a little less mocking. He was still soaked, still jobless, still uncertain. But he was also free. Free from the constant criticism, the petty demands, the suffocating atmosphere of Grumble's garage. He just hoped that freedom came with a roof over his head and food on the table. The unexpected arrival. The morning after the flood, Sparky awoke to a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. Sunlight streamed through his dusty window, painting stripes across the cramped room. He stretched, wincing as his muscles protested the previous day's heroics. The gnawing worry about his future hadn't vanished with the floodwaters, but a sliver of hope, fueled by the memory of Dr. Sterling's grateful eyes, remained. He shuffled to the kitchenette, the linoleum cold beneath his bare feet. The aroma of burnt coffee, a Sparky Sprocket signature, soon filled the air. As he poured the steaming liquid into his chipped mug, a peculiar sound drifted in through the open window, a low, almost musical hum. Curiosity piqued, Sparky peered outside. Parked directly in front of his modest apartment building was a vehicle unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't just a car. It was a sleek, silver Bullet, its curves impossibly smooth, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like polished mirrors. He could hear the faint whisper of advanced technology, a subtle whirring that promised power and precision. A car like that didn't belong on Primrose Lane, a street notorious for its sputtering engines and rusted-out sedans. He choked on his coffee. Who could be visiting him? And in that, as he stood there, dumbfounded, a door on the vehicle hissed open with a barely audible sigh. Dr. Evelyn Sterling emerged, her bright red hair a vibrant contrast against the car's metallic sheen. She wore practical, waterproof boots and a determined expression. Even without her lab coat, there was an undeniable aura of intelligence and purpose about her. Sparky nearly dropped his mug. "Dr. Sterling," he stammered, rushing outside, still clutching his half-empty mug. Across the street, a pair of beady eyes narrowed behind the grimy window of Grumbles' garage. Mr. Grumbles, drawn by the unusual commotion and the sight of the futuristic vehicle, stood hunched over, his face a mask of suspicion and avarice. He couldn't quite make out who Sparky was talking to, but the expensive car alone was enough to send his entrepreneurial senses tingling. Was Sparky involved in something lucrative? Something Mortimer Grumbles, could exploit? "Sparky," Dr. Sterling said, her voice warm and sincere, cutting through Sparky's bewildered thoughts. "I came to thank you. Properly thank you." She strode towards him, her gaze direct and unwavering. "What you did yesterday, it was extraordinary. You risked your life without hesitation, and for that, I am eternally grateful." Sparky, still overwhelmed by her presence and the sheer audacity of her arrival, could only manage a weak smile. I just did what anyone would have done, Doctor." "Nonsense," she countered, shaking her head. "Mortimer Grumbles certainly wouldn't have. I witnessed his blatant disregard for my safety firsthand. You, on the other hand, prove yourself to be a true hero." Mr. Grumbles, who was now inching closer to the edge of the window, straining to hear their conversation, bristled at the mention of his name. He considered crossing the street, demanding to know what was going on, but the sheer opulence of the car held him back. He didn't want to appear desperate. Dr. Sterling continued, her tone becoming more serious. "I understand that you were let go from your position at Grumbles' garage." Sparky winced. The sting of the dismissal was still fresh. "Yes, ma'am. Because of me," she stated matter-of-factly, "and that is simply unacceptable." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek, metallic card. "Sparky Sprocket," she announced, extending the card to him. "I would be honored if you would consider joining Sterling Innovations as my personal mechanic." Sparky stared at the card, dumbfounded. The words Sterling Innovations shimmered in the sunlight. This couldn't be real. A mechanic at Sterling Innovations? He nearly dropped his coffee again. Mr. Grumbles' jaw dropped. He recognized the name Sterling Innovations, the cutting-edge tech company that was revolutionizing the world of robotics and artificial intelligence. And Sparky was being offered a job there? But I'm just a mechanic," Sparky stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not sure I'm qualified." Dr. Sterling smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Your qualifications are impeccable, Sparky. You possess something far more valuable than technical expertise. You have integrity, courage, and a willingness to put others before yourself. Those are qualities I value above all else." She paused, her gaze softening. "Besides," she added with a wink, "my current mechanic thinks motor oil is a type of facial moisturizer. I desperately need someone who actually knows the difference." Sparky chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. He glanced at the card in his hand, then back at Dr. Sterling, a surge of hope coursing through him. Maybe, just maybe, being fired from Grumbles' garage was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Mr. Grumbles, witnessing the exchange from across the street, felt a pang of regret, quickly followed by a surge of resentment. He had underestimated Sparky, and he had definitely underestimated Dr. Sterling. He slammed the garage door shut, the sound echoing down the street, a bitter symphony of missed opportunity and simmering anger. A lifetime of opportunity. "Sparky," Dr. Sterling began, her voice cutting through the lingering hum of the air car's engines. "Sterling Innovations isn't just about pushing technological boundaries. It's about the people who make it all possible. We create, we innovate, but we also maintain. And we desperately need someone who understands the intricacies of machines, someone who can coax life back into even the most stubborn circuits." She paused, her gaze intense, and for a moment Sparky felt like he was being dissected by her brilliant blue eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with a loose bolt on his grease-stained overalls. Our current maintenance crew, well, let's just say they prioritize efficiency over empathy. They see machines as cold, unfeeling objects. You, Sparky, you treated that old engine like it was a sick friend. That's the kind of dedication, that's the kind of understanding we need. Sparky swallowed hard. But Dr. Sterling, I'm just a mechanic. I barely passed my certification exams. Your company, it's all futuristic. Dr. Sterling smiled, a genuine, warm smile that chased away the last vestiges of the storm clouds clinging to the day. Exactly. And who better to learn the future than someone who understands the past? Besides, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have a feeling you're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. You were pretty quick thinking out there in the flood. She straightened, turning slightly to address Mr. Grumbles, who stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of disbelief. Mr. Grumbles, I understand Sparky has been in your employ for some time. I hope you won't be too upset if I offer him a different opportunity. Mr. Grumbles sputtered, finally finding his voice. But, he's my best mechanic. Well, my only mechanic, but still, I can't just let him go. Dr. Sterling raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. I believe Sparky has the right to choose his own path, Mr. Grumbles. Don't you agree? Sparky held his breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glanced at Mr. Grumbles, whose face was now a mottled shade of purple. He looked back at Dr. Sterling, her eyes filled with an unwavering belief in him. Dr. Sterling, he said, his voice stronger than he thought possible, what kind of opportunity are we talking about? Dr. Sterling beamed. A lifetime opportunity, Sparky. A lifetime contract at Sterling Innovations. You'd be my personal mechanic, responsible for maintaining all my personal projects. You'd have access to cutting-edge technology, a state-of-the-art workshop, and a competitive salary, naturally. She paused for effect, then continued, her voice laced with enthusiasm. But that's not all. Full medical and dental, of course. Generous vacation time, stock options, and unlimited access to the company cafeteria. They make a mean nutrient pay surprise. Sparky's head was spinning. Stock options? Unlimited nutrient paste? This was beyond anything he could have ever imagined. He risked a glance at Mr. Grumbles, whose jaw had dropped so low it looked like it might detach completely. His eyes darted back and forth between Sparky and Dr. Sterling, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. A lifetime contract? Mr. Grumbles stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. You can't be serious. The boy is clumsy. He spills oil. He forgets to tighten bolts. He talks to the engines. Dr. Sterling chuckled. Those quirks are part of his charm, Mr. Grumbles. And I assure you, I value loyalty and kindness far more than conventional efficiency. She turned back to Sparky. So, Sparky Sprocket, what do you say? Are you ready to embark on a lifetime of opportunity? Sparky looked from Dr. Sterling's encouraging face to Mr. Grumbles' stunned, almost pleading expression. He thought about the endless days of grime and grease, the constant berating, the feeling of being trapped. Then he thought about the possibilities that lay ahead, the chance to learn, to grow, to be valued for his unique skills. A slow smile spread across his face. Dr. Sterling, he said, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. I think I like that very much. Sparky's bright future. Stepping through Sterling Innovations' pristine, glass entryway on Monday felt like a weightless ascent. The air resonated with the hushed power of cutting-edge tech, a world away from the Grumbles' garage's cacophony of clanging metal and fumes. He hugged his trusty toolbox, a momentary wave of doubt prickling his skin. Could he truly measure up? Dr. Sterling, a human supernova in a lab coat dusted with what looked suspiciously like luminous paint, greeted him with an incandescent grin. Sparky, bang on time, ready to witness the alchemy. The alchemy proved to be a sprawling lab, a vibrant ecosystem of nascent inventions, crackling wires, and shimmering holographic projections. It was beautifully chaotic, a controlled pandemonium that resonated perfectly with Dr. Sterling's vision. Introductions followed. Ben, the lanky engineer perpetually fueled by caffeine. Anya, a programmer of quiet, unwavering focus. And Carlos, a material scientist whose booming laugh could fill a stadium. Their curiosity felt genuine, their questions devoid of the condescension he'd become accustomed to. His initiation involved mastering the lab's automated maintenance system, a sophisticated web of sensors and robotic arms orchestrating seamless operation. Sparky spent the morning tracing circuits, attuned to the hum of gears, absorbing information like parched earth drinking rain. He detected a subtle tremor in one of the robotic arms, a near-imperceptible hesitation in its glide. Tentatively, he proposed a lubrication system refinement, a simple adjustment to minimize friction and maximize efficiency. Ben, initially dubious, ran the simulation. His eyes widened in astonishment. Good heavens, Sparky, you've cracked it. Performance jumps nearly 15%. A surge of warmth flooded through Sparky. He hadn't merely repaired something. He'd elevated it. The following days were a blur of focused immersion, his initial trepidation dissolving into burgeoning assurance. He found himself instinctively grasping the subtleties of Dr. Sterling's creations, anticipating potential snags, and devising ingenious workarounds. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a collaborator, a vital cog in the innovation machine. One evening, toiling late on a self-regulating irrigation system prototype, Sparky observed the water sensor's overzealous sensitivity, triggering activation even on days thick with humidity. He suggested integrating a barometric pressure sensor to compensate for atmospheric moisture. Dr. Sterling, lost in a whirlwind of equations, stopped as if struck by lightning. Sparky, that's inspired. Why didn't I see it? She immediately grabbed a sketch pad, her excitement radiating like heat from a furnace. This could transform agricultural practices in arid regions. A wave of elation washed over Sparky. He was contributing, making a tangible difference. The hours flew by, no longer a burden, but a thrilling expedition. But the flood remained a stark tableau in his mind. The utter devastation, the haunted eyes, the mud-caked memories, they spurred him to action. During stolen lunch breaks, he began a series of calls, reaching out to local businesses and community leaders. He pitched his idea, a flood relief fund to support those who had lost everything. Capitalizing on his newfound platform at Sterling Innovations, he mentioned Dr. Sterling's commitment to contributing resources and expertise. The response was an avalanche of support. Donations poured in, a mix of monetary contributions and essential supplies. Local contractors volunteered their skills to reconstruct shattered homes. Volunteers coordinated food drives and clothing banks. Mayor Mildred McMillan, a woman with a voice that could grind gravel and a heart of pure gold, took the lead in the fundraising efforts. She intercepted Sparky one afternoon, her eyes twinkling with mischievous delight. Sparky Sprocket, you're an absolute phenomenon, turning devastation into triumph. This town owes you more than you know. A town meeting convened in the town square. Mayor McMillan announced the establishment of the Sparky Sprocket Flood Relief Fund, met with a thunderous ovation. Sparky, humbled by the overwhelming outpouring of solidarity, could only manage a few stammered words of gratitude, his face radiating warmth. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was an emblem of hope, a symbol of the town's unbreakable spirit. The fund provided temporary shelter, sustenance, and clothing to families displaced by the deluge. It facilitated the rebuilding of homes and businesses, offering grants for materials and skilled labor. It provided access to counseling services, helping those grappling with the emotional scars of the disaster. Mr. Grumbles watched the news coverage from the gloom of his garage, his face a canvas of bitterness and regret. He saw Sparky, glowing with achievement, alongside Dr. Sterling and Mayor McMillan. He saw the radiant smiles on the faces of those Sparky was assisting. He saw the hollowness of his own avarice. The wrench slipped from his numb fingers, crashing to the concrete floor. He stood alone, haunted by the specters of his choices. Sparky, meanwhile, was only just beginning. He had already conceived a plan to develop a superior flood warning system, leveraging Dr. Sterling's advanced sensor technology. He envisioned a network of strategically deployed sensors capable of detecting rising water levels and providing early alerts to residents, granting them vital time to evacuate and secure their belongings. He knew it couldn't erase the past, but it offered the chance to avert future catastrophes and protect lives. He knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time, Sparky felt firmly planted on the right path. He had discovered his purpose, ignited his passion, and glimpsed a future brighter than any he had ever dared to envision.